All right, welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're going to be taking a look at something you're really wanting to understand better, and that's analysis paralysis.
Okay.
Specifically, you know how it relates to autism.
Right.
You sent over a bunch of really interesting stuff for us to go through, articles, blog posts.
Oh, wow.
There are even some personal stories in here. Should be pretty interesting.
Sounds great.
Ready to dive in.
Absolutely. It's important to just say right off the bat that this isn't just about being a little indecisive or anything.
Right.
Analysis paralysis, especially for people on the autism spectrum, is a lot more complex than that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the articles that you sent over, the title really jumped out at me. Autistic Fears, the Case of Pickles.
Uh-huh.
And it just, I don't know, it really shows how wide-ranging the challenges can be.
It really does. And that title kind of helps illustrate something super crucial about autism, and that's this need for predictability.
Okay.
The world can feel very overwhelming and unpredictable. For autistic individuals, so routine and knowing what to expect become really, really important.
That makes sense.
So then when they're faced with a decision, that uncertainty can be truly paralyzing. It's not just about, picking a pickle. It's about navigating this world that feels totally out of control.
Yeah, it's almost like even just simple choices get blown way out of proportion
Right.
because the stakes feel so much higher.
Right.
One of the sources talked about how even just visual clutter can be a factor.
Yeah.
Too many options, like sensory overload going on.
Uh-huh.
It just makes sense that it would feel almost impossible to make a decision.
And that's where this gets really interesting. The research actually suggests that for a lot of autistic individuals, their brains actually process information differently. It's not just about wanting things to be a certain way. It's actually about how their brains are wired.
Oh, wow.
So then this intense need for predictability and for the right answer, it can lead to this kind of freeze response
Oh.
when they're faced with choices.
So it's not even indecision, it's almost like a neurological traffic jam or something.
That's a great way to put it. And the source material actually even had a personal story in there about someone who was stressing over choosing an outfit for a casual get-together.
Oh, wow.
Imagine the pressure to make the right choice for something as simple as what to wear.
And that makes me think about how social anxiety plays a role, too.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it's not just about the choice itself,
Right.
but also how other people will perceive that choice.
Yes.
I know I've felt that way sometimes, even in situations that didn't seem like that big of a deal.
Right.
Have you ever felt that kind of pressure? Like everyone is judging your every move?
Absolutely. Yeah, that social anxiety is a huge factor. It just adds another layer of complexity for anyone, but especially for those on the spectrum.
Right.
So we have this combination of needing predictability, the brain processing information differently, and then we add on that social anxiety piece. It's really no wonder that decision-making can be so challenging.
So then, how do we help someone navigate all of this? The sources had some really interesting strategies.
Yeah, one of the simplest but most effective approaches is actually just limiting the choices.
Oh, okay.
Instead of presenting like a whole closet full of clothes, what if you offered 2 or 3 pre-selected outfits?
Oh, okay.
This reduces what's called the cognitive load,
Oh,
meaning the brain doesn't have to work as hard to process all of that information. It's about creating a sense of manageability within this world that feels very chaotic.
that's a great way to put it, creating a sense of control. And speaking of control, the material also talked about visual supports and how they can be really helpful.
Right.
What makes them so effective, especially for those on the spectrum?
Visuals can make all the difference in the world. Think about it. For a lot of autistic individuals, the world can feel really overwhelming because it's so abstract.
Okay.
Visuals, on the other hand, are really concrete and they're very clear. They can actually help break down these complex concepts and make things way more predictable. For example, a visual schedule, can actually show what to expect throughout the day, which can really help ease that anxiety and make it much easier to plan and make choices.
That actually reminds me of something I read in one of the blog posts. It was talking about how visual supports can also help reduce the anxiety around transitions.
Right.
It's like having a roadmap for the day, makes everything feel less overwhelming, a little more manageable.
Exactly. And speaking of managing things, the material also talks about the power of practice and setting time limits.
That makes total sense, breaking things down into smaller steps.
Right.
It's like training for a marathon. You don't just run 26 miles on day one.
Right.
You gradually increase over time.
Exactly.
Celebrating those small wins along the way, I think that approach could be really helpful for anyone facing analysis paralysis.
Absolutely.
Not just people on the autism spectrum.
What do you do? I totally agree. It's all about building confidence and resilience through practice.
Yeah.
And this kind of brings us to another really crucial point,
Mm.
especially for autistic individuals who might be more sensitive to criticism
Okay.
or the feeling of failure, creating a safe space for mistakes.
Yes, this really resonated with me too. It's just about understanding that everyone makes mistakes.
Of course.
And it's okay to not be perfect.
Right.
But for someone with autism, where that need for rightness is so strong,
Right.
that safe space can be essential for growth.
Absolutely. It's about fostering an environment where they can try new things,
Yeah.
they can make decisions, they can learn from their mistakes without the fear of judgment.
That's a great point. So we're seeing that analysis paralysis, especially in the context of autism, isn't just about being indecisive, right?
Right.
It's this really complex combination of neurological differences, the sensory experiences, and social anxieties.
Absolutely.
But the good news is there are strategies to help.
There are.
We've talked about limiting choices, visual supports, practicing decision-making, setting time limits.
Yeah, and importantly, creating that safe space where mistakes are seen as opportunities for learning and growth.
Exactly. Now, this deep dive is just for you, but it makes me wonder, how can we as a society create more understanding and acceptance around these challenges?
That's a really powerful question.
What if we could all just approach mistakes with a little bit more compassion, see them as just part of the learning process?
Yeah, that's a really great point and something we should all be thinking about. It's about creating a world where neurodiversity is celebrated and not stigmatized.
I love that. So we've learned that analysis paralysis is a very real challenge, but there are things we can do to help. By understanding the underlying factors and implementing supportive strategies, we can empower those on the spectrum to really navigate their choices with greater confidence and ease. Now, let's dive a bit deeper into the world of autism and explore how analysis paralysis might affect other areas of life beyond just everyday choices.
Okay, sounds good. I'm ready when you are.
Yeah.
This whole conversation about analysis paralysis and how it can make even like simple choices feel overwhelming.
Yeah.
It kind of reminded me of a point that was made in one of the articles you sent over.
Oh, okay.
It was talking about how this extends way beyond like everyday decisions,
Right.
impacting things like social interactions, career decisions.
Oh, right. I remember that.
Really big stuff.
Yeah, it was talking about how for someone on the spectrum, the complexities of social cues and these unspoken rules can be just so difficult to navigate.
Exactly. Imagine the pressure of trying to figure out when to speak, what to say, how to interpret body language,
Yeah,
all while worrying about saying or doing the wrong thing.
right.
You know, for someone on the spectrum, the idea of like initiating a conversation or joining a group can feel like just this minefield of potential missteps.
Oh, wow.
And that can really easily lead back into that analysis paralysis loop that we were just talking about.
Yeah, it makes me think about a time when I was at like a networking event and I was just totally out of my element. It was like my brain just froze up.
Oh,
I couldn't figure out how to approach anyone
Right.
or what to even say. And that was just a casual event. I can only imagine how much more intense that would be
Right.
for someone with autism where those social anxieties are just amplified.
Oh, absolutely. And the research actually backs that up too. Social interactions, they require so much on-the-fly processing and interpretation,
Right.
which can be especially challenging for autistic individuals. You know, they thrive on predictability.
Yeah.
So then instead of engaging, they might actually withdraw or avoid social situations altogether.
That makes sense.
And that obviously can have a huge impact on their social development and sense of belonging.
It's like they're constantly analyzing every possible outcome,
Yeah.
every potential misinterpretation,
Right.
and it just gets too overwhelming to even try. And then there was that part about how analysis paralysis can impact things like job searching or career advancement, which also feels very high stakes.
Exactly. Think about it, the sheer number of job postings,
Yeah,
the complexities of the application processes, the uncertainty of interviews.
right.
It's a lot for anyone to handle.
Yeah.
But for someone on the spectrum, it can be just completely paralyzing.
The source material even mentioned this idea of an autism tax, which really stuck with me.
Yeah, the autism tax, it's essentially referring to the extra effort,
Right.
the time and energy that autistic individuals often have to spend just to navigate a world that wasn't designed for them.
Yeah.
It's present in their daily tasks, in those social situations, and absolutely, in their professional lives.
Right. It's like they're constantly having to translate between two different worlds,
Yeah,
two different sets of rules and expectations,
exactly.
which would be exhausting.
Absolutely.
And then there's the added pressure of like whether to disclose their diagnosis during a job search, worrying about potential bias
Uh-huh.
or trying to like mask their autistic traits to fit in.
Absolutely.
That's a heavy burden to carry.
It is.
And it highlights why creating more inclusive and accommodating environments is so important.
It really is.
So how can we, like as individuals and as a society, help alleviate this burden?
Well, it starts with understanding.
Okay.
We need to educate ourselves about the unique challenges and the strengths
Right.
that autistic individuals bring to the table, both in like personal and professional settings.
That makes sense. Challenging our own assumptions about what's considered normal.
Exactly.
It's about recognizing that there are many different ways of being in the world
Uh-huh.
and that autistic individuals offer really valuable perspectives and talents.
Exactly. We need workplaces, educational systems, and social environments that are truly inclusive,
Right.
where differences are celebrated and not just tolerated.
Yeah.
This means providing support and accommodations where needed,
Yeah.
but it also means fostering a culture of respect and understanding.
One of the blog posts you sent talked about the importance of self-advocacy for autistic individuals, which feels really crucial in this context.
It is. Self-advocacy empowers individuals to understand their own needs,
Okay.
to communicate those needs effectively,
Right.
and to ask for the accommodations that would allow them to thrive.
So it's not just about others providing support, it's about equipping individuals with the tools and the confidence to advocate for themselves.
Absolutely.
It's about creating spaces where their voices are heard and their needs are respected.
Exactly. And this isn't just about jobs and social situations either.
Right.
One of the website excerpts you shared mentioned the impact of analysis paralysis on relationships, which I thought was really interesting.
Oh, right. He was talking about how the fear of making a mistake
Yeah.
or saying the wrong thing or
Yeah.
even just being judged can make forming and maintaining relationships really difficult
Exactly.
for some artistic individuals.
Think about it.
Yeah.
Building intimacy requires vulnerability, which can be terrifying if you're constantly worried about being judged or misunderstood.
It makes me think about those early stages of dating
Yeah.
where you're always second guessing yourself, wondering if you said the right thing or
Yeah.
if you came across the right way.
Uh-huh.
And now amplify that by 10, add in the social anxieties that we talked about earlier.
Right.
And it's no wonder that some autistic individuals might avoid relationships altogether.
It's a heartbreaking reality.
Oh.
And it just highlights this need for creating a society where vulnerability is embraced.
Yeah.
And where these differences in communication styles and social preferences are understood and respected.
Right.
And not seen as deficits.
It's like we need to create a world where people feel safe to connect on their own terms.
I love that. Connecting on our own terms.
Without the pressure to conform to some arbitrary standard of
Yeah.
normal.
So what can we do to support autistic individuals in their relationships, especially given this challenge of analysis paralysis?
Well, the material had some good tips. One that stood out was the importance of clear and direct communication,
Uh-huh.
avoiding sarcasm
Right.
or figurative language,
Yeah.
which can easily be misinterpreted.
That's so important. Clear communication is key in any relationship,
Right.
but it's especially crucial when one or both partners are on the spectrum.
Yeah.
It's about saying exactly what you mean
Mm-hmm.
without beating around the bush
Right.
and being open to asking for clarification when needed
Yeah.
without the fear of judgment.
And speaking of clear communication, one of the sources mentioned this idea of a relationship roadmap,
Oh, I love that idea.
which I thought was brilliant.
It's basically a document that outlines each partner's needs,
Okay.
expectations, and boundaries within the relationship,
Right.
like a user manual
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
for how to navigate the relationship successfully.
Exactly. It can cover things like preferred communication styles,
Hey.
ways of showing affection,
Ah.
sensory sensitivities, and even like strategies for managing conflict. Having that open communication
Yeah,
and that clear understanding from the outset
absolutely.
can really help prevent those misunderstandings and help build a stronger foundation of trust.
Absolutely. And just like any good user manual, it should be revisited and updated as the relationship evolves.
That's a good point.
So we've seen how analysis paralysis can show up in those everyday choices,
Right.
social interactions, career decisions,
Uh-huh.
and even relationships.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much this one challenge can permeate so many different areas of life.
It is. And it really highlights the importance of creating a more inclusive and accommodating world.
Absolutely.
A world where neurodiversity is valued and celebrated, not seen as something to be fixed or overcome.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that everyone has their own unique strengths and challenges,
Right.
and that we can all benefit from a world that embraces difference.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of different ways of experiencing the world, one aspect we haven't touched on much yet,
What's that?
sensory sensitivities, which are a huge part of understanding the autistic experience.
Right. You're
We
right.
should definitely talk about that.
Yeah, let's do that. Sensory sensitivities are definitely a key part of the puzzle, and the sources you sent over really kind of brought that to life.
Yeah.
It's fascinating how they can manifest in just so many different ways.
It really is. And it's important to kind of define what we even mean by sensory sensitivities right off the bat.
Right.
It's essentially how an autistic person's nervous system receives and responds to sensory information.
Oh.
Things like sights, sounds, textures, smells, tastes.
Yeah, all that stuff.
For some, it's about being hypersensitive,
Okay.
meaning they actually experience these things much more intensely than neurotypical folks.
One of the blog posts had this really powerful description from a woman who's hypersensitive to noise.
Yeah.
She compared going to a crowded restaurant to having her brain bombarded by 1,000 tiny hammers.
Oh, wow.
That's a really visceral image
It is.
that really drives home just how overwhelming those experiences can be.
It does. And it highlights why creating sensory-friendly environments is so important.
Yeah.
Like, think about things like dimming the lights, having quiet spaces available, or even offering different seating options to accommodate those sensory preferences.
Right.
These little changes can make a huge difference in how comfortable and included someone feels.
It makes you realize how much we take for granted in terms of sensory input.
Yeah.
Like, we might not even notice the hum of fluorescent lights or the texture of a certain fabric,
Right.
but for someone with sensory sensitivities, those things can be so distracting or even painful.
Exactly. And then there's the flip side, hyposensitivity.
Okay.
This is where someone has a decreased sensitivity to certain stimuli.
Okay.
They might actually crave intense input, like loud music or strong flavors, or they might not register things like pain or temperature changes as easily.
One of the articles talked about a boy who loved to rub his hands on rough surfaces, like brick walls. It was his way of seeking out that intense tactile input that his system just craved.
That's fascinating.
It's a good reminder that what might seem strange or unusual to us
Yeah,
could be a vital way for someone else to kind of regulate their sensory experience.
absolutely. And this brings us to another important concept, stimming, or self-stimulatory behavior.
Okay.
Stimming is basically a way for autistic people to manage sensory input and emotional states.
Okay.
It might involve repetitive movements like rocking, hand flapping, spinning,
Right.
or it might be vocalizations or repetitive phrases.
Like those little rituals we all have, like
Right.
tapping our foot when we're nervous or twirling our hair when we're bored.
Exactly.
Stimming serves that same purpose, but it's often just much more noticeable and can be misinterpreted by those who don't understand it.
Right, and it's important to remember that stimming is often a very necessary behavior for autistic individuals.
Oh, okay.
Trying to suppress it or punish it can be incredibly harmful. So instead, we should be focusing on creating environments where stimming is accepted and accommodated.
One of the sources talked about the importance of providing sensory toys or tools
Yeah.
like fidget spinners or weighted blankets,
Yeah.
which can help regulate that sensory input and reduce the need for more obvious forms of stimming.
Exactly. It's all about meeting individuals where they are
Yeah.
and giving them the tools they need to manage their sensory experiences in a way that feels safe and comfortable for them.
This whole conversation really just emphasizes the importance of awareness and education.
It does.
The more we understand about autism, the better equipped we are to create a more inclusive and accepting world.
Absolutely. And awareness goes beyond just knowing the facts about autism.
Right.
It's about understanding those lived experiences of autistic individuals, challenging our own assumptions and biases, and advocating for change.
One of the articles highlighted this concept of neurodiversity,
Yes.
which feels really crucial here.
It is. Neurodiversity challenges this idea that there's one right way for brains to work.
Right.
It embraces the fact that neurological differences, including autism, are a natural and valuable part of human diversity.
It's like shifting from a deficit mindset to a difference mindset.
Exactly.
Instead of seeing autism as something to be fixed or cured,
Yeah.
we see it as a different way of experiencing the world
Yeah.
with its own strengths and challenges.
And that's a powerful shift. It opens up possibilities for celebrating those artistic talents and perspectives,
Yeah.
rather than trying to force conformity to neurotypical norms.
One of the website excerpts talked about the need for more autistic representation in the media, in literature,
Right.
even in positions of leadership.
Absolutely.
It was saying that when we see autistic people succeeding and thriving,
Right.
it challenges stereotypes and inspires others to embrace their own neurodiversity.
Absolutely. Representation matters,
Yeah.
and it's especially crucial for marginalized communities. You know, when autistic people see themselves reflected in these positive and authentic ways,
Mm-hmm.
it sends a powerful message of validation and belonging.
And it helps educate those who may not have personal experience with autism.
It does.
It allows them to see beyond those stereotypes
Yeah.
and recognize the incredible diversity within the autistic community.
And speaking of education, the sources you provided also emphasize the importance of supporting autistic-led organizations and initiatives.
Yes. Empowering autistic people to advocate for themselves and their community is so important.
It really is.
They are the experts on their own experiences,
Absolutely.
and their voices need to be at the forefront of the movement for autism acceptance.
And that includes supporting research and innovation in the field of autism,
Right.
but research that is driven by the needs and priorities of the autistic community,
Yes.
not just the assumptions of outsiders.
It feels like we've covered so much ground in this deep dive, from understanding analysis paralysis
We have.
to exploring that broader landscape of autism and neurodiversity.
We really have. We've only just scratched the surface.
Right.
But I think we've laid a solid foundation for you to continue learning and exploring this fascinating and really important topic.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's one key takeaway you hope our listener will hold on to?
That's a great question. I think the biggest takeaway is this power of empathy and understanding.
Okay.
When we approach autism, and really any difference, with that curiosity and willingness to listen,
Right.
we open ourselves up to a whole new world of possibilities.
That's beautifully said. We've talked about strategies, accommodations, societal shifts, but ultimately it comes down to human connection and understanding.
Exactly. And I really hope that this deep dive has given you the tools and the inspiration to continue learning, advocating, and connecting with that autistic community.
I hope so too. Thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery. We encourage you to keep diving deep, keep asking questions, and use this knowledge to make the world a more inclusive and welcoming place for everyone.